Why does no one care about the plight of poor white people? Well, first, poor white people themselves don't complain about being poor and are more likely to attribute their situation to personal failings than government policies or other external factors. Second, poor white people still feel they have white privilege, allowing them to maintain their place in the racial hierarchy. They feel more aligned to rich white people than they do to poor black people. And given this complacent mindset, government leaders feel no compulsion or pressure to advocate for or provide support to poor white people. And finally, this allows government leaders to slash programs that support the poor because the largest affected group will actually support them. Hello again. Welcome to the Ruthless Truth. I am your host, Truth Davis. In this forum, I share opinions, thoughts, truths on a wide variety of topics based on what I consider to be a unique life experience. And you can read more about that in the notes or the bio. My intent is to share experiences and stories and hopefully provide some life and career lessons that'll help you on your journey. Please follow me on Instagram at TruthDavis5, subscribe to the YouTube channel Ruthless Truth, and there's also a Facebook page, Ruthless Truth. General format, I'll have some comments on current news items or just some thoughts. Then I'll take one topic and go into a deeper discussion, which is today's truth. And then I like to end with an American history fun fact. Okay, as always, there's a lot going on in the country, but it feels like that we've had the same headlines for the last 3 weeks. So I'm not going to discuss the news today. Instead, I only have one topic in my opening remarks. So, this February marks the 100th anniversary of Black History Month. Although at its origin, it was known as Negro History Week. The second week of February was chosen to coincide with the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, who were born on the 12th and 14th of the month, respectively. The first celebration of Black History Month was in 1970, and it became a nationally recognized day by President Gerald Ford in 1976. Now this year, there are celebrations and commemorations planned from coast to coast for the entire month. Now, I must confess, I've always been a bit torn about Black History Month. Now, I think most of you know I am an avid student and fan of history. And not just because it's interesting, but it's also informative and instructive. I'm also disappointed in how few people really know or care that much about the history of this country. I know it's an old cliche, but it has never been more relevant than it is today. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And that was first written in 1905 by George Santayana. Now, there are better known versions of this quote, but the sentiment is basically the same. You know, many of the current events in the United States have been previously experienced here or elsewhere in the world. In the 1930s, the United States pursued an aggressive tariff policy that accelerated a global economic crisis. We've previously seen police states where citizens were detained and asked to produce their papers of citizenship. Chaos, anarchy, and violence soon followed. We're not there yet, but it's worth noting. And we have seen other countries surrender federal monetary policy independence to a national leader who wanted to control it. And in nearly every one of those cases, the economy of those countries collapsed. Okay, back to Black History Month. There's no question that historical mainstream history texts and teachings have done a gross disservice to the experience and contributions of Black Americans in building this great country. And I strongly believe there should be a more concentrated effort to include this content in the various American history outlets. But I guess I have two concerns, and maybe concern is even too strong a word. Maybe it's just I have questions. First, I want it clearly understood and accepted that Black history is American history. That any telling of American history that doesn't include Black history is incomplete and inaccurate. And as bad as it is for Black history, it's far worse when it comes to Native American history. And what about Asian American history? You know, the Chinese began arriving here in large numbers in the 1850s to work in the gold mines and on the railroads. I believe their experience and impact is greatly underreported and underappreciated. But I feel in some ways, Black History Month provides a pass, a crutch, or an out for the writers of American history. They may feel less need or urgency to make the effort to integrate Black history into their teachings because they can point to Black History Month and just say, see, it's already being covered there. It also provides non-Blacks to comfortably reject Black history as not part of their own history. You can't disentangle the experiences because they occurred at the same time in the same places. You know, there's a saying in the Black community, and it is that slavery is white history. How we survived it is Black history. Now, I agree with all of that. Slavery, Jim Crow, Black Wall Street, the Civil Rights Movement, all of that. It's American history. I just wonder if having a separate celebration month does just that. Separates and segregates history for Blacks from non-Blacks. I think every group wants to be included in American history. You know, it may be hard for some people to remember or believe, but up until the late 1990s, you rarely saw minorities in mainstream U.S. consumer advertising. I know this because in 2001, I oversaw all advertising for Verizon Wireless, and I managed the single largest brand budget in the nation. Now, I had one agency that developed all my mass advertising, and then I had a multicultural advertising agency that developed Black targeted and Spanish language commercials. But upon receiving the position, I immediately instructed my math agency to begin casting diverse ethnicities into our brand and consumer advertising. We coined the phrase ethnically ambiguous to be included in casting calls. And soon after, just to see, I conducted market research among Black consumers, where I tested my Black targeted commercials and the mass commercials to gauge their reaction. Surprising to most of my team, Black people rated the mass commercials that included Black people significantly more favorable than they did the ads that were specifically targeted to Black audiences. And when asked, the Black consumer said they liked the feeling of inclusion in the mass ads more than the blatant targeting of the Black ads. And some of them even felt the Black ads were a little bit patronizing. So from then on, I stopped developing the Black targeted advertising, although we continued with Spanish language efforts. And while I no longer needed the multicultural agency to produce Black only ads, they were still included in the discussions and development of the mass commercials to help ensure relevant and realistic depictions of Black consumers. So to close this subject, I think the goal should be to tell the complete American history, including Black history. Now, until that happens, Black History Month provides an attention and focus that may not otherwise exist. But let's not settle for that. Our goal should be to expand the telling and writing of American history until we reach the point that we all agree there's no continued need for Black History Month. Okay, let's get to today's truth. Today's truth. It continues to amaze me that so many people who live in this country and have lived here their entire lives still don't understand how this country works. And what is particularly surprising is that it's not a complicated concept to grasp. The United States has always been about money. If you look throughout history to the present day, you will find that economics is the primary driver behind just about every major event or decision. From the Boston Tea Party to the American Revolution to slavery, Civil War, Jim Crow, civil rights, and so on. It's about money. So, given this backdrop, in today's truth, I want to discuss in depth why no one is thinking of nor cares about poor white people. Okay, first the numbers. Of the 40 million Americans living in poverty, white households make up the largest percentage, accounting for 48%, or 19 million people. Now, the poverty rate for white people is the lowest of any demographic, but because white people still comprise over 50% of all Americans, the actual total is larger than any other demographic. So, why don't we hear outcry from white leaders demanding more attention and programs to address white poverty? We hear it for every other economically disadvantaged ethnic group, but we don't ever hear proposals for policy or programs to address white poverty. Why? Why is that? Well, there's several reasons, and I'd like now to outline some of those leading reasons here today. Okay, reason number one, perceived white privilege. Many poor whites place their racial identity above their economic status. For decades, the people of power have effectively convinced poor white people that they have more in common with rich white people than they have in common with poor black people. This allows them to maintain a sense of superiority and higher social status, even if they are actually poorer than the blacks they disassociate themselves with. And this intentional effort is not a Republican or a Democrat thing. It's a power thing. I mean, this dates back to the beginning of slavery. During slavery times, fewer than 10% of all U.S. households actually owned slaves, although in the South it was closer to 3 out of 10. But within that, only a small percentage of households owned large quantities of slaves. But slavery wasn't about race. It was about economics. Just think how profitable your agriculture or manufacturing industry would be if you had free labor. But the institution of slavery couldn't survive and thrive without the support of the majority of white people. So slavery was positioned as a race issue. Blacks were seen as an inferior race, allowing white people to take comfort in the brutal treatment, or at least to tolerate it. It offered poor white people membership in the white privilege. Okay, reason number two. White people in power are able to pacify poor white people with rhetoric and social beliefs that provide no economic benefit, but strengthen their sense of privilege. And before I go any further, let me clarify who I'm referring to when I say people in power. Now, the people in power are rich white people, but not all rich white people are people of power. It's like all Dalmatians are dogs, but not all dogs are Dalmatians. Most rich white people in this country do not have a zeal or interest for power. They just enjoy and love the lifestyle that wealth affords them. And then there are many others who are bleeding heart liberals who care about improving the status and quality of life for those less fortunate than them. So no, when I talk about people in power, I'm referring to the leaders in Washington, on Wall Street, and in corporate America. Sure, these people have money, okay? But money is simply a way to keep score. They recognize that there are people who have more money, people such as LeBron James, Rihanna, Bruce Springsteen, but they don't consider them players in the power club. Okay, back to reason number two. White people in power are able to pacify poor white people with rhetoric and social programs that provide no economic benefit but strengthen their sense of privilege. Some examples of this include Second Amendment rights, prayer or the Ten Commandments in schools, Confederate monuments, anti-LGBTQ and anti-DEI stances. These are great rallying cry issues that deepen the belief of poor white people that all white people are united in privilege. But none of this rhetoric in any way improves the economic status of whites living in poverty. Nothing here addresses school quality, the cost of health care, affordable housing, access to capital, or any other economic benefit. But this race-based solidarity encourages white working class voters to align with wealthy conservative leaders rather than focusing on economic redistribution. Again, they are pacified. You know, there's a really great movie entitled Mississippi Burning that was released in 1988. It tells a fictionalized account of the 1960s civil rights movement in general, and then in particular, the tragic deaths of 3 young civil rights workers. Now, the lead characters are FBI agents played by Gene Hackman and Willem Dafoe. And in one memorable scene, Hackman's character, who is a former Southern sheriff, tells a childhood story of how his racist father had taken violent action against one of their black neighbors who was a more successful farmer. And he justified it by saying, quote, "If you ain't better than a nigger, son, who are you better than?" And then Hackman expressed this poignant reflection. He was an old man so full of hate that he didn't know that being poor was what was killing him. Okay, reason number 3. And I realize this is a provocative statement, but I absolutely believe it to be true. Reason number 3. Rich white people think less of poor white people than they think of minorities in poverty. Why? Because they look at white poor people and say, what's your excuse? Hell, we know there's a systematic and institutional policies and mechanisms that make it harder for people of color to break through. But this doesn't apply to you. So why couldn't you get there? Now, this isn't a totally accurate or fair take by the people of power, because regardless of color, it's difficult for anyone to rise from poverty to wealth. In fact, only 4% of poor Americans are able to rise from poverty and achieve wealth. And it's only 17% of them that even make it to middle class. However, despite their situation, many poor white people still feel they share privilege, although unequally so, with rich white people. And this can lead to a belief that the system is fair, because even in poverty, they're not experiencing the additional barriers of systemic racism. Okay, reason number 4. Poor white people don't complain to nor blame the government for their poverty. Polls and studies show that many white Americans, particularly conservatives, tend to attribute poverty to individual failings, such as a lack of effort or bad decision making, rather than government failure. They believe too much government makes people dependent. As I've said many times, politicians respond to 2 things: vocal voters or money. And some of this is understandable and practical. I mean, there's a never-ending list of potential political issues to address. So politicians do struggle to prioritize. As such, they focus on the issues that either receive media attention or loud vocal support or opposition. So when government leaders don't receive high volumes of emails or calls asking for government support or action, then these political leaders feel comfortable and safe doing nothing. Okay, the final reason. Reason number 5. As part of the white entitlement, working class people will vote for policies that actually harm them as long as the racial hierarchy remains. And while the current administration has exploited this, using racial tensions as a weapon to justify regressive policies, this practice has persisted for generations. They are not the first ones to do it. And many of these lower income white people believe that welfare and public assistance programs are associated with minorities and that participation may undermine their whiteness. There was a recent National Bureau of Economic Research study where they asked white respondents about their beliefs on the racial distribution of welfare recipients. Results concluded that respondents overestimated that 37% of welfare benefits went to Black people. In reality, Black recipients make up 21% of welfare, far from the 37% of the respondents' belief. And in a very recent development, many poor white Americans supported Republicans' position to let the Affordable Care Act subsidies expire, leading to significant increases in monthly health care premiums in 2026. This support is astonishing to me, given that nearly 75% of Obamacare recipients live in red states. So to summarize, why does no one care about the plight of poor white people? Well, first, poor white people themselves don't complain about being poor and are more likely to attribute their situation to personal failings than government policies or other external factors. Second, poor white people still feel they have white privilege, allowing them to maintain their place in the racial hierarchy. They feel more aligned to rich white people than they do to poor Black people. And given this complacent mindset, government leaders feel no compulsion or pressure to advocate for or provide support to poor white people. And finally, this allows government leaders to slash programs that support the poor because the largest affected group will actually support them. This is a fascinating dynamic in our society. And for the reasons just cited, it's unlikely to change anytime soon. Okay, let's get to today's American History Fun Fact. Today's American History Fun Fact. I love business ingenuity and innovation. I especially like it when someone takes a slightly different approach to an established way of doing things and creates an entirely new avenue for success. So to that end, for today's American History Fun Fact, I want to tell the unique story of one of my favorite businesses, Five Guys Burgers and Fries, which is celebrating 40 years in business in 2026. Now, I'm assuming most of you have heard of Five Guys, and I hope that many of you have had the pleasure of eating a Five Guys burger. But whether you've experienced it or not, let me ask you a question. When's the last time you saw a commercial or advertisement for Five Guys? Well, you haven't, because the company doesn't have much of a marketing budget. Now, in recent years, there have been some modest marketing investments, mostly in digital, but nothing significant. And this is unbelievable because the quick service restaurant industry, known as QSR, and includes all fast food establishments, spends over $3.5 billion a year on advertising. But not $1 of that is contributed by Five Guys. So how did they become so successful? Well, let's take a look. So in 1986, Jerry and Janine Morrell were living in Arlington, Virginia, raising their four sons. Jim, age 19, Matt, 17, Chad, age 14, and Ben, who was only 3 years old. And like many parents, for years, the Morrells had saved money to pay for their children's college education. But that year, they offered their two oldest sons a choice. Do you want to attend college or use the money we saved for your tuition to start a business? Well, the sons chose the latter, and in 1986, the family opened a small burger joint in a strip mall in Arlington, Virginia. The 5 guys were a reference to Father Jerry and the 4 sons. Now, the Morels later had a 5th son, allowing the 5 guys moniker to remain accurate, now referring just to the sons. The original menu consisted solely of burgers, cheeseburgers, and fries, and offered no in-store seating. From the beginning, the sons were the primary operators of the business, with Jim managing during the day and Matt covering the evenings. Chad, who was only 14 at the time of the first opening, he would hustle to the store after school to take on whatever tasks were assigned to him. And while Jerry and Janine remained involved in the business, they really saw it as their sons to run. But Jerry did establish and insist on one critical rule: don't cut corners. So they only used fresh, never frozen beef. From the beginning until today, Five Guys restaurants do not have freezers. They only have refrigerators, and there are no microwaves. As for the fries, Jerry would only buy from sources above the 42nd parallel, believing this would provide the ideal starch content. I don't know where you learned that. But as such, the potatoes are purchased from Washington and Idaho, washed, then soaked to remove any excess starch before being hand cut into the signature fries. And while Jerry recognized there was some risk, he made the decision to fry in 100% peanut oil. So, how did they intend to attract customers? What would be the marketing strategy? Well, the Morels strongly believed if they focused on delivering a consistent, high-quality product and a great in-store experience, their customers would deliver the message via word of mouth. And that's exactly what happened. Five Guys developed a cult-like following in the DC area throughout the 1990s and built a reputation for having the best fast food burgers in town. The menu also expanded to include Hebrew National all-beef hot dogs and then grilled cheese and BLT sandwiches. The stores were also known for their bag fries, where the employees would put an extra scoop of fries in the bag. Now, the cost of this is built into the price of the fries, but it provides customers with this psychological edge, a sense of extra value. Now, the company experienced modest growth, and by 2003, had only expanded to 5 total locations in the DC area. Well, at this point, the sons wanted to expand and franchise, but Jerry was resistant. He doubted the chain's ability to maintain its cult concept and to maintain the quality outside of their original market area. However, Janine and the boys were able to persuade Jerry to agree to franchising the brand. The rest is history. Franchising began in 2003 and within 18 months had grown to 300 locations. The company also implemented an extensive and frequent secret shopper program to maintain and ensure that the franchisees were delivering a quality experience. Stores may have been secret shopped as frequently as 2 times per week. And stores and employees could earn bonuses for high secret shop scores. You know, I was living in Philadelphia when Five Guys arrived, and the line stretched down the block. Five Guys is now a $2 billion enterprise and has nearly 2,000 locations across 29 countries. They have maintained quality, reputation, and brand despite limited marketing investment. And although the company has recently developed a modest marketing budget, but this is a great example and reminder that quality, execution, and consistency are key factors in building a successful and now iconic business. Okay, that's all I have for you today on The Ruthless Truth. Thank you so much for listening. Again, follow me on Instagram at TruthDavis5. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, Ruthless Truth. There's also a Facebook page, Ruthless Truth. Thanks again, and I will talk to all of you soon.